Welcome to the Dinosaur George podcast, a show about paleontology and other earth sciences. Dinosaur George is a public speaker, author, and TV host with 30 years of study in paleontology. He has performed live in over 4,500 events across the US and Canada. Now, here is Dinosaur George.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome. I'm Dinosaur George. This is our newest podcast. In this episode, the things we'll cover in our creature feature segment, Tyrannosaurus Rex, the king of the dinosaurs, the most magnificent, terrifyingly monstrous dinosaur in North America. During our Science Safari segment, we're going to focus on the Burke Museum, which is a beautiful museum located in Washington. And speaking of the Burke Museum, we have an interview with paleontologist Dr. Greg Wilson from the University of Washington in Seattle. He is also affiliated with the Burke Museum, and he's going to talk about a new Tyrannosaurus Rex specimen that they are in the process of completely excavating and prepping. At the very end of this podcast, we'll do some Ask Dinosaur George questions. So sit back, relax, and I hope you enjoy the information you'll learn on our latest podcast.
Bring Dinosaur George's traveling exhibit to your school, museum, or city. This is the largest exhibit of its kind in North America and will turn any facility into a natural history museum. You'll see things like prehistoric mammals, giant fish, ancient reptiles, and of course, dinosaurs. It's affordable, amazing, and will be an event you'll never forget. See complete details at dinosaurgeorge.com or call us toll-free, 888-487-7478. Bring Dinosaur George's traveling museum to your community today.
It's time for our feature creature segment. If you would like to suggest a creature, go to dinosaurgeorgepodcast.com and post it in the comments section of this episode, or email us your suggestions to contact@dinosaurgeorge.com. And now, our feature creature.
Tyrannosaurus Rex is known as the king of the dinosaurs, and it is an amazing creature. It was discovered in 1902 by Barnum Brown and then named in 1905 by Henry Osborn. This is the most popular dinosaur known on planet Earth, and it's hard to understand why it's so much more popular than other dinosaurs, but it must have been because at the time there was nothing like it. And it made it into every single book and textbook on the planet that had anything to do with dinosaurs. And so it was something that everybody, regardless of how much they like dinosaurs, everybody learned something about Tyrannosaurus Rex. This is a big predator, lived in the late Cretaceous between 68 and 65 million years ago. It is a bipedal carnivore with very small arms. Now, for you young guys, bipedal means walking on two legs. Carnivore means it ate meat. It had little tiny arms, and there's so much debate about the function of those arms. What did they do? What were they for? Unfortunately, I don't believe there's a consensus that completely explains what the function is. Some people have proposed that they were used to kind of grapple and hold on to struggling prey. Some even propose that if the dinosaur was laying on its stomach sleeping, it would use them to give it a little push. Here's why I don't believe that to be the case. Just my 2 cents. The gastralia, that's the belly ribs that run in the front of a Tyrannosaurus, are not incredibly robust. And to think about the sheer amount of weight on that dinosaur, if it was laying on its stomach, you would suspect those bones to be crushed and pulverized over its lifetime. It's sort of like when a whale beaches itself. It's so much weight that it can't even expand and contract its lungs while it's laying there. Well, I'm not saying Tyrannosaurus couldn't breathe when it was laying on its stomach, but I would say because of its weight, those ribs wouldn't support it, and it would probably have trouble breathing. And like I said, I think those rib bones would be crushed. So I don't think it was used for lifting itself off the ground. But again, who knows? It weighed up to 6,000 kilograms. That's almost 6,000 tons. That is a very heavy animal. It's got 60 serrated teeth with a bite force of about 1.5 tons. To put that in perspective, if you took a car that weighed 1.5 tons and you put your hand down on the street and you put a tooth in the middle of your hand and you lowered that car onto that tooth, the weight of a 1.5 ton car or truck is what you would feel if this animal were to bite you. The largest specimen is Sue, and she measures 12.8 meters long. That's about 42 feet, and 4 meters tall at the hip, which is about 13 feet. Their skeletons are found from Canada to Mexico. Now, when they're young, it's been estimated that they could put on about 1,500 pounds of weight per year. Think about that, 1,500 pounds. That's the size of a medium-sized bull. And imagine putting on that much weight in a year's time. Some people estimate this thing to be able to run upwards of 15 to 25 miles an hour. My guess is that if it could run that fast, it probably couldn't keep it up for very long. They're not designed for long distance running. If they were as fast as they propose, even 15 miles an hour is very fast considering how big it is. If they could run that fast, I suspect it wasn't for long. So if they were going to ambush you, they had to grab you pretty quick because they're not going to last very long in a long distance speed race. So I would suspect that its prey, if it could outdistance it, they had a very good chance of getting away. Now, Tyrannosaurus Rex remains one of the most popular dinosaurs in the world, and yet they're not that common in the fossil record. So with us to talk about the discovery of an amazing new specimen is the Associate Professor of Biology and Adjunct Curator of Vertebrate Paleontology in the Burke Museum of Natural History, located at the University of Washington in Seattle. This is Dr. Greg Wilson. Dr. Wilson, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, George. It's good to be here.
Oh, I appreciate you taking time out. I know how busy you are. So before we talk about this amazing discovery, tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
I grew up in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and I have an older brother and a younger sister, and my older brother actually is also a paleontologist. His name is Dr. Jeff Wilson, and he's at the University of Michigan, and he studies sauropod dinosaurs. And he's a little bit older than me, and we thought that we'd go on to play professional soccer and be star athletes. But it turns out that we both found ourselves, while in college, getting interested in paleontology. And I kind of followed in his footsteps and went into paleontology. And I went to Stanford University for my undergraduate degree, and then to the University of California, Berkeley for my doctorate degree, where I focused on mammals that lived at the time of dinosaurs and the extinction event that wiped out dinosaurs and led to the rise of mammals. And after graduate school, after I received my PhD, I was a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Helsinki for a brief 7 months, and then came back to the United States to become a curator at the Denver Museum initially. And I stayed there for 2.5 years before taking on the position that I have now at the University of Washington, which I started in 2008. And I've been doing field work out in Montana and other places in the world since I was a graduate student.
Good grief. So if you're the typical brothers, do you guys compete with discoveries and papers and that sort of stuff?
Well, I mean, we sort of have traditionally divided our world up, him taking on the largest terrestrial animals and me taking on the smallest ones at the time, the mammals. So we've actually been able to work together and be on the same team. I think if we were still in soccer, we'd be much more competitive. In the field of paleontology, I think we're much more cheering for each other.
So sitting around at the Thanksgiving table, he says, I found an 80-foot Diplodocus, and you say, I found a rat.
Yeah. But what's even worse is my wife is a paleobotanist, so she studies fossil plants. So Thanksgiving dinner can be quite a bore for the rest of my family sometimes.
What a family history. So you touched on every conversation for you people is death.
Yeah, exactly.
It always goes back to death. Can't you brighten up the conversation?
Yeah, exactly. An ancient, dusty thing.
You had mentioned about your field work. I know so many of my listeners are young, and they just dream of this idea of getting to go out and dig in the field. What is that like? What really is digging in the field like?
Well, it's definitely an adventure. It's definitely, some amazing high points, like, discovering something that's been otherwise unseen for millions and millions of years. So you're the first person to ever have seen a fossil. Maybe it's simply a tooth, a small, tiny tooth that lay hidden in some dirt, or maybe it's a huge dinosaur bone that's sitting at the crest of a hill that no one had walked across and recognized. So those are the high points, and there are also a lot of times that it's really hot. The days are long. We work as long as the daylight will allow us, and sometimes back in camp we work without daylight with lanterns, and there's a lot of laborious note-taking and hard physical labor, whether it be digging trenches to understand the geology, the rock layers, or whether it's to dig around a big dinosaur bone, or whether it's carrying out big 50-pound burlap sacks worth of dirt that might have tiny little mammal fossils in it. There's a lot of hard labor like that. And sometimes there's inconveniences. You wait around for a new tire because your other tire on your vehicle got a flat, or you're cooking all your meals every night by camp stove, or you're finding a place to go to the bathroom out in the middle of nowhere. So there's all kinds of different highs and lows and extremes that go on out in the field. But in all, it's you're part of a team. You're working together with a lot of people, and you're sharing the highs and the lows. And I think that really makes everything really gel.
Man, I would have to guess that in the middle of the heat of it all, you're wishing you were back in your office, and then 2 days after you're back in your office, you're ready to be back out in the field.
Yeah, there's definitely a point early on in the season where you're just kind of getting your field legs, and you're getting your rhythm out in the field of, packing your bag in the morning and remembering how fossils show up on the ground, and, the different times of day and so on. That takes a little bit of getting used to, but once you're out there, you get in this nice little groove that you kind of don't want to leave for a while until you start longing for maybe family or friends back home or some of these comforts that you're talking about.
Right. Well, now, before we talk about this amazing new Rex, let's talk a little bit about the museum. I went to the website, and I'll give out that information in a minute, but I went to the website. That is a pretty amazing museum. Talk a little bit about the Burke.
Yeah, so the Burke's been around for a long time, but it's in need of a makeover. And so they're currently just to the side of the existing museum, they're digging a big hole and laying a big foundation for a brand new, bigger, in terms of square footage, museum. It's going to be just a fantastic new museum that's larger, but it's also more transparent. So a lot of open spaces with a lot of windows between the exhibits and into the spaces that scientists are going to be working. So the collection spaces, the laboratories will be visible to visitors of the museum. And much more of our material will be on exhibit than presently exists on exhibit. So we're sort of going with this theme of turning the museum inside out, and allowing people to really understand more than just these things as objects, but as working parts of the scientific process. And that's really exciting for me because I'm active as a scientist, and I really want to share what we're doing and connect with people who otherwise haven't had the opportunity to see what scientists do.
Boy, it's so great to see museums embracing that. You know, when I was a kid, museums were those places where they almost treated them like libraries. You didn't speak, you didn't get excited. Right. And the dinosaurs were often, or anything was often dimly lit with a couple of spotlights, almost a little ominous when you were a kid.
Yeah.
You know, because it was dark. And you never, ever saw any of the scientists. I mean, if you were lucky, you saw one walking across the display area. Yeah. But you never got to watch. I am thrilled. Well, for everybody listening, burkemuseum.org, BURKEMUSEUM.org. Go to the burkemuseum.org website. You will be stunned at what the current museum has to offer, and I cannot wait till the new one is ready. So now, the internet has been alive with reports of this new Tyrannosaurus Rex, and I bet you your phone never stopped ringing. Why don't you tell us its nickname and give us some info about this amazing Rex?
Yes, this is a new specimen that we have called the Tufts-Love Rex, and we've called it that because two of our Burke Museum volunteers and parts of our members of our Hell Creek project, Luke Tufts and Jason Love, who actually have other jobs. One is a bookkeeper for nonprofits, and the other is a blood pathologist. So he's a MD. They have other jobs, and they do this just on the side, and they work with our team. And they go out a little bit earlier than the rest of us just due to their schedule. And they poke around and look for fossils for us. And they did that and mentioned to us that they had found something that looked like it could be little scraps of T-Rex. And they could tell this because it was a big bone, and it was sort of broken up on the surface. And what they saw, in addition to it being big, because a lot of dinosaurs are big, they found internal structure that had a honeycomb texture to it. So you can imagine a honeycomb, and the inside of the bones of Tyrannosaurus Rex and other carnivorous dinosaur vertebrae, their backbones, have this honeycomb texture, which lightens that bone up. So it's not a solid bone and weighs a lot. It's a little bit lighter than that by being honeycombed. And so they recognized that, and they wrote to us and came by and provided us with the locality information for that spot, for that site. And this is an area that we go to every summer, and I've been going since 1998, so 19 years, so a long time. Wow. And these guys discovered a new specimen for us, and so we went out and followed it up this summer. And initially on the surface, it didn't look like much. It just looked like scraps of a T-Rex. And that's great, but there are a lot of localities that end up like that, just scraps on the surface. So our team spent some time digging into the hillside that these scraps were lying against. And as they started digging in, they started to find complete bones. So things like ribs and what are called gastralia, or belly ribs of a dinosaur. And you could tell that these were very large bones, and they were very complete in nice preservation. So they weren't broken up once you got into the surface. So that gave us a clue that we really had a nicely preserved specimen. But at that moment, we only had ribs. And so we knew that they were probably ribs of that same T-Rex. But ribs of a T-Rex aren't quite as exciting or something you want to put on exhibit at a museum.
Right. So
we were still hopeful, optimistic, but cautious. So we kind of were holding our breath a little bit. And over the course of the next couple of weeks, we continued to dig at this hillside and expose more of these ribs and expose other elements, and finally other elements of the skeleton. And finally, we started to uncover the back of the skull of this animal. Just a couple of bones at the back of the skull. And that was a great moment. But we were still holding our breath, hoping that there was more in that hillside, that we'd have a complete skull. and that we wouldn't be just left with the back of a skull. That wouldn't be very exciting to most museums and most museum visitors. So we continued to dig, and finally, after about 3 weeks, we revealed that the back of the skull continued on into the hillside and had with it the front all the way up to the snout, along with all the teeth in the jawbone, the upper jawbone,
wow.
the maxilla. And that was the moment where we could really breathe a sigh of relief in terms of knowing that we had that fantastic skull specimen that we were all dreaming of.
Oh.
And that came after a lot of work. I just recounted that story relatively briefly, but there was a lot of tedious removal of the hillside, like tons and tons, literally tons and tons of rock. We estimated about 20 tons of dirt had to be removed from that hillside just to get down to the level where we could start carefully digging to look for bones. So it was a lot of labor from a lot of individuals that had a lot of dedication to this endeavor to find a T-Rex.
Oh, my gosh. Now, did you have the ability to bring in heavy equipment to do all of that, like big bulldozers and backhoes and things like that?
Initially, no. In the future, I hope. Initially, we worked mostly with shovels, pickaxes, and jackhammers, and wheelbarrows.
My God.
And so it was a lot of labor. And that was just to get to the level where we could start digging carefully. And then we had to dig carefully around the specimens and make pedestals, so extract them from the rock that surrounded them, and then make plaster jackets to protect them like you would a broken arm. And then we had to flip those jackets so that we would remove them from the hillside. And that's no easy task either when you're talking about something, a plaster jacket that has fossil and dirt in it that weighs upwards of 3,000 pounds.
Whoa.
And that's the estimate for the skull block. The other blocks are also similar in weight. And so we're talking about a lot of heavy lifting, a lot of labor that goes into collecting this thing. And at that point, once those jackets were free from the hillside, those plaster jackets, we then brought in a rancher who had a lot of toys. And by toys, I mean farm equipment that could lift things and drag things and pull things. And he brought in a tractor with a front scoop on it, and we attached chains to it and to our T-Rex skull jacket, and we lifted that thing out off the ground and put it on the back of a truck, and that truck drove it up to the road level, and then from the road level we transferred it onto our truck, which then carried it about a 2-day trip home back to the museum in Seattle.
Good grief. Boy, you know, when people see a skeleton in a museum, I wonder if we spend enough time understanding the process of what it took to get it there. And what you just described it's almost like building the pyramids. You know,
yeah, it's a lot of work.
Before you got the heavy equipment in, I mean, you did the reverse of building the pyramids. You took down a mountain to get to it. That is fascinating. And you know, the most important thing I hope the listeners take away from this is that you had two volunteers, two people that weren't associated necessarily with the group, that had enough knowledge to know not to try to excavate it themselves. They were knowledgeable enough to not do it. You know, so many times people see things and the first reaction was, let me yank this bone out of the ground. And that couldn't be a worse thing to do for you guys because of the damage. So good for them for doing that. Now, were they able to be there with you as you were uncovering more to see how complete it appeared, or were you communicating to them?
I was communicating with them via email, and you know, they were beside themselves. You know, really, they've found some really fantastic other specimens as well. But those specimens, they mostly knew when they saw it that it was a fantastic specimen. This T-Rex specimen was a surprise because, as I said, and as you can see on our Burke Museum website, the initial discovery, the bone looked very broken up and fragmentary and weathered. And so it turned into a lot more than was visible on the surface. And so they were just totally thrilled by the discovery and, really couldn't believe it. And, they were back in Seattle and, catching this email by email, and next thing you know it, they're splattered across the news headlines with regard to this T-Rex. So it's kind of a fantastic thing for them.
Man, now I cannot imagine. I've had the opportunity in my life to go to various places and dig. And, when you uncover something, you're right. You're the first person to see it in the history of the world, which is amazing when you stop and think about it. But what was it like to see a tooth? Because obviously that's the thing that most people find amazing. What was that moment like?
Well, I received an email about that part of the discovery. So I was in our camp our main camp is located separately from the camp that we set up, the satellite camp we set up for the T-Rex.
Right.
So, and I was actually working with 35 K through 12 teachers at that time. So I bring elementary school and high school and kindergarten teachers out to teach them about paleontology and geology and the process of science. And I was doing that with them, and my T-Rex crew was over at that site working on the T-Rex. So I got an email one night, the day after I had taken the teachers out there to visit the site. So they had some context for it. And then I got this email where my crew had discovered the teeth on this maxilla, on this upper jaw of that specimen, and I couldn't keep it in. I had to share that with with the teachers and our crew, and we just had a real nice party that night.
Man, see, you're a much better man than I. I would have given them a can of pork and beans and a compass and said, that way is home. I've got to leave.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely an inkling in my head about that, but it was great fun to be able to share that process and that discovery with all these teachers and give them a window into how we do it and the highest of highs in discovery of in paleontology. So that was really fun.
Wow. I like mammals. I'm a mammal guy. I really like, I dinosaurs, of course, are what I love, but I really like mammals. And it's sometimes hard for me to convey to people the variety of mammals that exist. But no matter what kind of oddities were out there, there is nothing more popular than Tyrannosaurus Rex. What do you think it is about that dinosaur that just intrigues everyone?
Yeah, it's certainly across the board is exactly true. I am also a mammal expert, and I sort of sometimes shun the spotlight of all the dinosaur fandom, and I didn't grow up playing with all kinds of dinosaur toys. I was more interested in mammals and animals in general, but there is something about seeing something that enormous that had that much power and would have been that fierce of a predator that you can't help but have a visceral reaction to. You just see it and you feel something, and those teeth are the key to that. Definitely, those big banana-shaped teeth. They're different from most other carnivorous dinosaur teeth. Most carnivorous dinosaur teeth are very compressed laterally, side to side, whereas T-Rex has these big, broad banana-shaped teeth that have those very visible serrations like a steak knife, and you can't help but make the next leap in the imagination to that animal feeding on another large animal.
Right.
So it's pretty spectacular.
Yeah, it certainly is. Now, really, you're just at the beginning of this thing. You got it out of the ground, and that was a great and amazing discovery. But now comes the real work. How long do you think it's going to take to prep what you brought in from the field?
Right now, it's the jacket, the plaster jacket itself is unopened, and it's on display with a lot of actual bones of another set of T-Rex specimens. So it's on display until October 2nd, and then it'll come down off display, and then that's when we start to take our next steps towards preparing, opening that jacket up, so cutting through the plaster, opening it up, and seeing the rock and the bone, and starting to carefully prepare that thing. And it will probably take on the order of a year to get it complete or close to complete. But we'll start to see some really nice parts of it that we haven't seen probably in the next three to 5 months. So we'll start to get hints of exactly what we have on the left side of the skull, which is the side that was down into the ground. The right side was the one that we uncovered and we could see.
Right. Wow. So from where you were digging, were you given any clues to the environmental conditions for where this thing died? Was it in a floodplain, a riverbed, near the ocean? Were you able to figure any of that out this early in the game?
Well, we know from the general geology of the area that this was a coastal lowland. So it was, an area kind of like Mobile, Alabama, perhaps. And it was feeding into this big western interior seaway that basically ran north to south from, at various times, all the way through Canada down to the Gulf of Mexico, and starting around the middle of North Dakota, South Dakota, and Kansas. And we know that this area was lush with vegetation, and it had meandering rivers coursing through it, heading from west to east. And the specimen itself was found in channel deposits. So it was somehow found itself in a river and was buried within a river. How it died, whether it died in the river or whether it died on the banks of the river, on the floodplain, and then was swept in, is unclear. And we may never know that. But we may, as we start to prepare the specimen and find other bones of it, we might start to get clues about possible causes of death. We might see evidence of predation or a fight between another T-Rex perhaps, or some other injury to the animal. Or we may see that there was nothing evident in the bones and that it died of other causes. So we'll have to see. But certainly we can tell that it wasn't an old individual. Based on the size of its skull relative to other T-Rex specimens, we know that it was an adult, but probably wasn't a very old adult. So it may have died from something other than just old age.
Wow. So for you young listeners, the reason why it's hard for you to give us definitive answers is because in the field you're not uncovering and removing the bones and observing them. You're simply removing away enough dirt to see the bone so that you know what not to dig away, and then you immediately protect it in the cast that you talked about so you can ship it back. So you're not studying the specimen necessarily in the field, right?
That's exactly right. We want to do as little as possible in terms of uncovering the skeleton and the skull, because we're really not in the best environment to carefully work on it. That's a lab environment that you want to be working on a specimen like that. So we're trying to just simply get it back to the best environment to work on it, which is the lab, and that's why we don't really expose a lot of the skull or the skeleton. We just wanted to expose enough so we know where the edges of the bone are, and that way we can start to put plaster around it and carefully take it home.
A lot of people get frustrated when a new discovery is found because you're not giving definitive answers. That's one of the reasons why, is because the field is not the environment for you to do the study. But the second reason why you're unable to give more solid answers is because you have to study every aspect of the animal, and you have to go through a set or you follow a set of rules basically to ensure that when you do make your announcements, you've done all the due diligence study. In other words, you can't open it up and look at it and go, I declare this dinosaur is 12 years old and he died of a heart attack, just because you saw a femur. Right.
And I think one of the things that I like to stress is that uncertainty is okay. That we don't know a lot of things about a lot of things. There's a lot for new scientists like some of your listeners to go out and discover and understand, and it takes a lot of data. Still, we won't know absolutely for sure about a lot of things that we're curious about. So, what color was T-Rex? Well, we don't know, but that's okay. There are actually people that are making breakthroughs on trying to understand how we might start to learn about how color might fossilize, and how we might be able to then figure out the reverse, what color those things were in life. So there's a lot of open questions in paleontology. So rather than thinking of paleontology as this study of dead things that we know everything about, we just have to go to a museum and dust them off and look at them, it's better to think of it as a very active, dynamic science in which there are lots of questions that people are working on, and with each question that we work on and each tool we develop, there are more questions that we can ask and try to address and answer. Excellent.
So your long-term plans for this Tyrannosaurus, what do you think will happen? And understandably, it'll be years down the road, but what do you suspect will be the long-term plans for this thing?
Most definitely we'll be exhibiting whatever we end up finding. So, certainly we have parts of the skull. We hope we have the whole thing, and that will go on exhibit once it's prepared. And we're going to go back this coming summer and look for more in the hillside. We didn't finish the quarry. We just didn't have enough time over the course of the summer to extract everything. We know there's more bone, so we're going to go in there and see where it leads us. And hopefully it'll lead us to the rest of the skeleton and parts of the animal like the legs, the femur, and other parts of the legs. And there are other scientists that want to study and work with us on the T-Rex. Mary Schweitzer, who's a famous dinosaur paleontologist that has looked at soft tissue remains and things like blood vessels and red blood cells and so on. She is interested in this specimen if we can uncover some more parts of its skeleton. And there are other T-Rex specialists that I'm sure will want to come to our museum and study it and incorporate it into the research that they do. So it'll have outreach in the sense of being exhibited and visitors and so on, and it'll have a lot of research that it will be a part of. So we're excited for the future of this specimen as kind of an iconic specimen at the Burke Museum.
Well, I know you said the public can see the T-Rex skull in the field jacket along with other T-Rex fossils and some of the tools you guys use, and that'll be in the lobby of the Burke Museum through Sunday, October 2nd.
That's right, yeah,
okay.
At the museum.
One other thing about the museum, one other headline I found when I was doing research on what you guys had found, is the Burke Museum paleontologists discovered the first dinosaur fossil ever found in Washington State. Is that right?
Yeah, that is right. That's a nice curiosity. That the young people and adults of the state of Washington are always hankering for a dinosaur from Washington. But the sad part of it is, from that perspective, is that Washington was covered by water during the time of dinosaurs. So it wasn't a place where dinosaurs, which are animals that roam the land, were roaming around. But we happened to encounter one that was washed offshore, and it was preserved on Susha Island, and that's just up in northwestern part of Washington. And so we happened upon this, and paleontologists from the Burke, Chris Sedor and Brandon Peacock, wrote a paper up describing this specimen, which is really fantastic for the state.
That's pretty exciting. It's hard for people to understand why dinosaurs are only found in given areas. It's not that they only lived in those given areas, but in some cases, the layer that holds the bones could be so far down you never get to see it. And in other cases, like you said, you have oceans covering it. So, well, right. That's exciting. Congratulations to the crew for doing that. The museum is located at on the University of Washington campus in Seattle. And again, make sure to go to their website burkemuseum.org to find out about their T-Rex celebration and all of the things. And in fact, you mentioned you were out there with a group of teachers, and that was done through the museum, right?
Yeah, that's a program that I started back in 2010. It's called the DIG Field School, DIG, Discoveries in Geosciences Field School, and that is affiliated with the Burke Museum, and you can find that on their Burke Museum webpage, or if you go to digfieldschool.org.
Now, is that something that is limited just to the teachers in your area, or is that open to, I mean, obviously you have to have limitations of how many people you take out, but is it open to teachers throughout the country and Canada?
It's open to people throughout, teachers throughout the country and Canada. And we've had applicants from almost, not quite every state, but about 40 states so far, and had participants from nearly 40 states. So we've really spread out, and every year we take out about 35 teachers. And we've been doing this for 7 years now. So we've hit quite a few teachers, and those teachers take what they've learned and bring that back to their classrooms and really excite students that they have in their classrooms about paleontology, about geology, and about the process of science in general. So it's really been a fantastic program that we're very proud of, and we incorporate into our summer plans every year.
Wow. Anybody that is a science teacher out there, that is something you definitely want to look into, because what an opportunity. You know, it's one thing to read about it in books and listen to you talk on a podcast, but it is a different thing to be out there actually experiencing. And what a great teacher you'll have if you're fortunate enough to be able to do this. Dr. Wilson, I cannot thank you enough. I know how crazy busy your schedule has been, and I really appreciate you taking time. If you find something new, or as new discoveries are being made, we would love to contact you and have you back. I hope you'll consider coming back again.
Oh, of course. Thank you very much, George. I appreciate it.
He is an associate professor of biology and adjunct curator of vertebrate paleontology in the Burke Museum of Natural History in Seattle, Washington. Dr. Greg Wilson, it has been a pleasure. Congratulations on your Tyrannosaurus, and congratulations on finding the first dinosaur in Washington. Thank you so much for taking time out.
Okay, have a good one.
Thanks.
It was the largest predator in North America and known simply as the King. Now you can own fossil replicas from Tyrannosaurus Rex, the king of the dinosaurs. Our online store is filled with T-Rex teeth, claws, skulls, and more. Display them in your room or office, or use them as teaching aids in the classroom. Our prices are affordable, and we don't add excessive shipping fees. They are great gifts for anyone who likes dinosaurs. Go to store.dinosaurgeorge.com to see our wide selection.
It's time to ask Dinosaur George. In this segment, George answers your questions about paleontology. If you would like to leave a voice message, call us at 210-888-9077. This is not a toll-free call, so children, please ask your parents' permission. If you would like to submit your question in writing, go to dinosaurgeorge.com and click the Ask Dinosaur George page. Questions are chosen at random, and we clear all messages monthly. So if you have a question about paleontology, ask Dinosaur George.
Let's jump right in and answer some of the questions that have been submitted by the listeners. This first one comes from Jeffrey from Acton, Massachusetts. Jeffrey, good to hear from you, buddy. Hello, DG. Love this podcast series. What sort of predators preyed on Dreadnoughtus? First of all, thank you very much. I'm glad you do like the podcast series. I enjoy making them. All right. So what sort of predator hunted Dreadnoughtus? For those of you that may not know who Dreadnoughtus is, it is a very, very large sauropod. That's one of the long-necked dinosaurs. It's an enormous dinosaur, and when it was first discovered, they proposed a size, and then I think people came back and said, it's not as big as you claim, but it doesn't make any difference how big it is. Giant is giant, and this thing is giant. The name means fear nothing. So the answer to your question is, Jeffrey, who preyed on him? I don't know. You know, the time period that he lived in, I can't find any really big carnivores living with it. There had to be something that preyed on it, but I suspect it only preyed on the young. You know, the biggest predator I can find that lived in Argentina during the same time is a dinosaur named Alvarezsaurus, but I don't think Alvarezsaurus, I think he was only like 5 or 6 feet long. He wasn't very big at all. So unfortunately, I don't know of any of the big predators. Now, keep in mind, yes, there were giant predators in South America, but it doesn't mean they lived at the same time in the same area. So unfortunately, I don't know who it would have been. But again, whoever it was, I feel very certain they only attacked the young or the sick or the weak. They surely were never going to mess with a dinosaur whose name means fear nothing. Okay, Noah, my buddy Noah from Shippensburg, Pennsylvania. Hey, George, I heard a documentary saying giant mosasaurs travel in groups. Do you agree with this? I don't think so, Noah. And the reason why I say that, I did a podcast with Mike Everhart, a paleontologist who is very, very knowledgeable when it comes to mosasaurs. And I asked him if these were pack hunting animals, and he just explained that there's no evidence to support it. In fact, any of you that want to hear that interview, if you haven't heard it already, I think it was my very first podcast. He was my very first guest on Podcast 101. Look it up. You definitely want to listen to it. But he does address this, and he said there's no evidence to support, because unless you die together, there's no way to know if you live together. And they don't leave footprints or anything like that because they lived in the ocean. So unfortunately, I don't know of any evidence that would support that. And it would be hard. It would be hard to find any evidence, even if they did. You know, if they all died together, they're in the ocean. It's not like unless they all laid down next to each other and died and were buried, and we can find that. But even that doesn't suggest that they hunted or traveled together. It just means that they, died at the same time. So anyway, it's a very difficult question, but so far, what I believe is the answer is no. All right, Thane from Maine. Hey, what a great name. Thane from Maine. Hey, DG, why is the Gobi Desert so rich in dinosaur remains? Good question, Thane. Two reasons. One, at the age of dinosaurs, what is now the Gobi Desert was a very good environment that was capable of supporting a large number of dinosaurs. And since dinosaurs figured out a way to survive in that environment, there was a lot of them. So when they died, there's more chances that they became fossilized. Second, why is it so rich in dinosaur remains? Well, actually, this is a 3-answer question. The first is when dinosaurs were alive, it was a great place to live. Answer number 2, the environmental conditions it took to bury the bones and the skeletons to cause them to become fossilized was perfect. And then number 3, erosion has taken away the layers of soil that once buried those formations, and now paleontologists can simply walk around and have a better opportunity to see the bones that are sticking out. So in other words, think of it this way, Thane. You have an animal, it gets buried in the dirt, layer upon layer buries it. You can't see the bones unless you either dig or erosion has carried away those layers that covered it. The good thing about the Gobi Desert is erosion has done much of the digging, and so it's so much easier for people to find them. It doesn't mean that was the only place in the world where dinosaur remains would have been incredibly common. It just happens to be a good place to find them. All right, Alex from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Were there any sauropods that lived in the Triassic period? Good question, Alex. The answer to that is no, not as we know them. There were prosauropods in the Triassic, like, what's some of the names? Oh my gosh, my mind just went blank. Plateosaurus, he's a prosauropod. Who else? Lufungosaurus, was he prosauropod? I can't remember. Anyway, there were early versions of sauropods, but none of them really looked like the sauropods we think of, like Diplodocus and Dreadnoughtus and Brachiosaurus and who else? Apatosaurus, any of those guys. Those big guys show up in the late Jurassic. but in the Triassic, we get early versions of them. Okay, finally, Danny from Michigan. Hey, DG, what are your thoughts on the dinosaurs in Disney's Fantasia? I know they're not realistic, but I really, really loved it as a kid. I completely agree, Danny. Those dinosaurs in Fantasia, if I would have had the ability, I would have run up into the projection booth and rewound that and replayed that segment over and over. I loved every second of it. It didn't matter if they were scientifically accurate. What mattered is that those dinosaurs in that movie may have very well created a huge number of paleontologists that we see around us today, because it was something exciting, it was something fun, and it was something about dinosaurs. All right, if you guys would like to ask a question, go to my website, dinosaurgeorge.com. Click on the Ask Dinosaur George page. Let me give you some advice. Make your questions kind of short and to the point. I would not recommend sending incredibly long questions, because I simply do not have the opportunity or the time to be able to answer them all. So anyway, send me your questions, and I look forward to reading them. That wraps up this podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun on it. Learned a lot of neat things about Tyrannosaurus Rex. For any of you that get the opportunity, make sure to visit the Burke Museum. Really excited to hear that they're building a new Burke. So that's going to be exciting. Make sure to go to their webpage and check out everything they have to offer. The interview with paleontologist Dr. Greg Wilson was a lot of fun. He's a really, really interesting man. And for those of you who are teachers, make sure to go back and listen to his interview again, because he mentioned that he takes teachers out into the field and lets them experience what fossil hunting and excavation is really like. So you really definitely want to sign up to go do that. For everybody that sent in some Ask Dinosaur George questions, I appreciate that immensely. I'll try to make it a point to do a special podcast where I only answer Ask DG questions, because I'm receiving so many of them. I can't fit but maybe one or two in each podcast. So I'll do a special podcast where I just answer those. For everybody out there, please follow me on Facebook or Twitter. You'll see links to those on my podcast page, which is dinosaurgeorgepodcast.com. And make sure to visit my online catalog at store.dinosaurgeorge.com to help me pay the bills. And then also check out my website, dinosaurgeorge.com. Until next time, everybody, I'm Dinosaur George, and I hope that you are kind to everyone you meet, because it makes the world a much better place.
Thank you for listening to the Dinosaur George Show. Please follow us on our social media links and join our mailing list. If you're interested in having Dinosaur George speak at your event, please visit our website at dinosaurgeorge.com. Until next time, keep digging for clues about the past.